Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Paul Sifuentes and Jake Teitgen will share 5 key principles of small group leadership. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions may be sent to our presenters using the questions section of the GoToWebinar panel, and I'll read as many of those as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and I will send you a link to the recording tomorrow via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenters today. Paul Sifuentes is the Director of Youth Ministry at the Archdiocese of Indianapolis. Paul has been in professional ministry for 17 years at parish and diocesan levels. He is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame, including an MA in theology. Jake Teitgen is the Director of Youth Ministry at Our Lady of Grace Catholic Church in Noblesville, Indiana, and has been working in parish ministry for more than 10 years. He currently serves on the board of directors at Bethlehem Farm, an intentional Catholic community in West Virginia. Paul and Jake are 2 of the 3 co-hosts of the Catholic Youth Ministry podcast, Pizza and Side Hugs. Paul and Jake, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Welcome. I'm going to go ahead, Jake, and make you the presenter.
Erin, you nailed that intro. That was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. All right. I will let you gentlemen go ahead and take it from here.
Great. Thanks, Erin. So Jake and I are happy to be with all of you today, and we really just want to dive into the topic today about what we're going to be discussing. And we believe something that we talk a lot about in ministry. Oftentimes in ministry, we can get wrapped up in talking about what kind of program do we do in ministry, whether it's for adults or for youth or for RE ages. Which program is the best? Which confirmation prep program? Which program for first year reconciliation? Which RCIA program is the best? And we have, after looking at a lot of different programs, have a lot of conversation, come to the conclusion that it's really about people and not programs. That we believe that the most important thing that you do is to form the people who are accompanying your young people or those who are going through, those who are in ministry. And right now, we're in September, the beginning of a normal ministry year, and it's 2020, so we're in a global pandemic, so nothing is normal. But probably at most places, we are looking for people to help us in our ministries. Catechists, small group leaders, volunteers, anyone to help us in our ministry. And what we want to do today is talk about when you have those people in front of you, those volunteers, those parishioners that are helping out, how do you help them accompany young people? And we often, when we think about this question, I always bring up my dad, George. Love my dad, great man. But my dad did not grow up with a master's in theology or an undergrad in theology or any training like that. He was a man who brought his family, my mom and myself, to Mass weekly and taught me how to pray. Loved the Lord, but wasn't too active in ministries per se. And he had a couple different occasions where he was in youth ministry. And so we always talk about, like, if my dad signed up for a program, my dad signed up to volunteer to be a part of youth ministry at my parish or Jake's parish or your parish, how do we tell him what he signed up for? How do we explain what it's going to mean to accompany a young person? What are the expectations that he should have? So today what we're going to do is we're really going to kind of lay that out in a unique way. I'll let Jake kind of unfold what the day is going to look like. Or the hour. This is not going to be a day long, promise. The hour.
Yeah, and I think the secret to meeting our leaders to form them into people who accompany and that Paul and I have seen over the years is there's not one tried and true program that works for this. And instead, we're all about relationships. And the good news for that is that authentic relationships are COVID proof. They can happen even right now. And so that's what we're calling our formators to do, is to be in accompaniment, to be in relationship with young people so that they can know them and lead them closer to Christ. And this isn't just our idea. Of course, authentic relationships is something that's been around for a long time and something we take directly from Christ himself. And so as you are trying to navigate this strange time of putting leaders in places so that they can accompany youth in a whole different time, we've developed some principles that will allow us to do that. And so what we'd like to do today is a couple of things. We'd like to share those principles that we're trying to get leaders in faith to adopt, to understand that when Paul's dad walks into the ministry, this is what you tell him we're asking you to do in this role. And then second, it would be to talk about how we get those, not to just tell them what to do, but how to get those leaders to that point. And so we're excited to share those principles with you today.
There they are. There are 5 of them. Kind of give you a little overview of the different principles. Number 1, we think people need to show up. 2, we think it's really important that we partner with parents and with families. 3, if you're going to be a small group leader, if you're going to be ministering, this isn't just a talk at you process. It's a discussion process, and we think we need to cause dialogue. Number 4, we think all of our people in ministry need to be followers. And number 5, we need to be focusing on the long game, the objective that is way down the road. But it's important to start off with just showing up. It sounds pretty simple. We want you to be there, but there's a little bit more into that process.
That's right. This doesn't sound super brilliant right off the bat, but it is one of the most important things that our small group leaders, our folks who are forming young people in faith can do. And I always think about one of our students in ministry. His name was Carl. He was a high school senior, and he had a tough task on one of our retreats. You see, on the last day of our confirmation retreat, we had all of the students who were there on their final day, and all of the high school upperclassmen and adults who had been leading. They were also there, but we invited the parents as well. And Carl was tasked with giving a talk to both parents and students. And he shared this very simple message. He said, listen, no matter what you're going through, no matter what's on your plate at that time, if you want to get closer to God, you need to continue to show up. You need to show up to church, show up to mass, show up to youth ministry. And you need to continue to do so over time in a consistent way. It was a really bold thing for Carl to say, and I was really excited about that. And then he turned to the parents and gave them a pretty stern message as well. And he told all of the parents in this room, as a young person though he was, you also need to show up. You need to not only show up for your family, but you need to show up to form in ministry, and you need to show up to mass and to church and all those same things. And, you know, after my heart stopped beating profusely because I was nervous about what Carl was going to say in front of a room full of parents, I was so proud, and that message was so bold and stuck out with me. This is what we need to be telling people of what's required, that being a leader for a young person is not I signed up for this volunteer gig to do for 90 minutes once a week, but instead something that you show up for on a more consistent basis. And so when we talk about showing up, we want small group leaders to show up and to be prepared and prayerful. A lot of the people who walk into a small group for the first time and it seems so easy and conversation is free flowing, there's actually been a lot of preparation that's gone into that. And you need to be someone who's consistent and reliable, that a young person can count on in their life. And you can see we've got, we'll have this for all of our principles. We'll have these 3 different subpoints to talk about, but we really want to focus on one of each of these for the sake of time today. And so for the principle of showing up, we want to talk about making an impact. Now, I think being there present is part of what we mean by show up, but I think we even mean to show up in surprising ways, ways that make an impact to a young person. And what I mean by that is when they walk into your small group, you don't just say hello to them for the first time, but you remember their name and you remember that thing they told you about last week, the big test that they were stressed about coming up or the performance that they had. And you lean into those things. Maybe it's showing up for something that's going on in the community, a sporting event that they might have, or perhaps the big talent show that they're a part of. We have, during this time of COVID, we've gone back to some of the tried and true quote unquote old school methods of communicating in this way. I have one of our core team leaders named Anna, and she is terrific because what she's really good at and fits into her wheelhouse is that she is great at writing a quick note. And so we've set up just a collection of different postcards in our youth ministry office. Anna can come in and knows that she can write a quick note to a student or a family or parents in that way. And it'll come from the church, and we'll have a stamp on that, and we'll address it for her and make it really easy so that she can show up and maybe surprise a student with how genuinely she cares about them and is willing to show up in their life by putting a quick note in the mailbox. We would even go a step farther with this here, that impact, that recognition of a student in a way that's surprising. We think that you should really try to do that 3 times. We call it our rule of 3, that if every single student had 3 impact recognitions, some way of standing out that made a difference in their life, that's 1, they're much more likely to continue to show up themselves. But 2 is, even if they're not at that point, we think it's going to give this impression that we're going to leave no doubt that somebody at the church really cared about them and wanted to hear what they had to say, so that when they are ready to be here and be present, that they have that impression left over. I know some of you out there could even do what I like to do, and we figure out ways to chart that, put it in a spreadsheet. I know we've got some Excel nerds out there. You're my people. And these are ways to do that. Actually, you're right, it's a nice idea to say, let's do this 3 times for every student. But what if you actually write down every student and you mark which core team leader and what was done for each of them? And this is the kind of showing up that we're talking about, something that's a little beyond just being there 1 time a week. Now, showing up for our students is really important. That's our first principle, but there's a whole other group of people that are involved when it comes to forming young people in their faith. And of course, that's our parents. And so Paul is going to talk a little bit about what it means to work with parents.
Yeah, and in this part where we talk about parents with our small group leaders, we need to make sure we understand that, everyone has a different situation. And some are blessed enough to have a mother and a father in their home. Some have grandparents, some have guardians, some have a stepmom or stepdad. And in this occasion, as I go through this step, we talk about parents, we mean those guardian figures in their life, whoever that could be. And I can remember when I think about partnering with parents, I think about this one time I went to a confirmation prep meeting, and the pastor got up for parent. All the parents were there. It was a parent meeting. We've probably all been at those sacrament prep parent meetings at some point. And the pastor got up and he spoke to the parents, reminding them kind of sternly about the promise that they made to the church, that they were going to bring up their child in the Catholic faith, and that they made that promise, and that they were responsible for that. And that they needed to really take this process of preparing for confirmation seriously, because they promised in front of God, in front of His church, that they did that. And I can also think of times where I've been around a table having food after a retreat or after a meeting with different leaders, volunteer leaders, and talking about how hard it was because these parents aren't supporting what we're doing at the ministry. Parents don't support what we're doing. They don't get it. They're not sending their kids every week. If they would send their kids every week, everything would be better. And there could be elements of truth with that. But what we're talking about with this principle is we want to make sure that we are partnering with parents. No parent, when they welcome that new child into the world, looks at the child and says, I can't wait to screw you up. I can't wait to fail at this. Every parent wants the best for their child. And so we want to encourage our small group leaders to partner with them in that. We say as a church that parents are the primary catechists of their kids. They are the primary formators. Do our ministries and our budgets of our ministries show that? Do we actually partner? Do we say, you're the primary ones, we're going to pour into resources to help you? So we really want to take that to heart. So there are kind of 3 things here, again, those 3 points. Number 1, you're not a secret agent. We need our small group leaders, not just our youth ministers, our leaders. We need our small group leaders, our volunteers, to be known and to know the parents. We're going to talk about the second one. And the third one is honor thy father and mother. that the ministries that we do and the small groups that we lead need to be fun and exciting, but they can't be dangerous. We need to take these most wonderful parts of these families, these children, and we need to take care of them. We need to honor them by earning their trust and taking care of their kids. And we talk more about that in that third point. But the second one we want to kind of dive into more today, real quickly here. We want to compliment and compliment parents. Number one, we want to compliment with an E. We want to be an ally of parents. We want to be a bridge to connect students and parents. We don't want to seem like we are against the parents. That, you know, this is a period of time, oftentimes we're dealing with high school or middle school youth ministry age. Oftentimes we can have problems with kids relating to their parents. And as small group leaders, we don't want to deepen a divide there, but we want to show ways to connect parents and their students. That doesn't mean that we're going to be able to solve every problem. We're not family counselors, but what are the ways that we can not just, you know, badmouth a parent to their child? What are the ways we can connect them? And also, when we're doing ministry and we're thinking about what we're doing, we need to work within family calendars. Realize that we don't think that families should always adjust to everything that we're doing, but how are the ways that we can make sure that the rhythm of our ministry, the rhythm of our meetings are on the calendars of the families, that they fit in the realistic, the world that the families are living in. Then we want to compliment, actually it's pronounced, I try to say it differently, but it's the same pronunciation, with an I. You know, we want to give parents compliments. Tell parents how great their kids are. I think it's such an easy thing to do, but something we often overlook. We often don't take the time to make that connection to a parent and tell them how great their kid is doing. A story I often think about is, you know, I would often go to all the masses on Christmas Eve, and I would start to know parents because I had never met before. But wouldn't it be great if we started before the one mass a year at Christmas that some of these parents come to? What if we reached out to them to talk about their kids? And that's really hard for a youth minister to do for the whole parish. But for a small group leader to do it with their small group, it's much more doable. Reaching out with a phone call or with an email and saying, hey, this is what I saw, or that postcard Jake talked about. This is what I saw in your kid, or Sam shared this wonderful thing in small group this week, and I just want to say you guys are doing a great job. It's such a great pleasure to have Sam in small group. If you really want to take this to the next level, you know, have a goal for every small group leader to call a parent once a quarter or once a semester, just to check in. Hi, how you doing? I'm the small group leader. I'm just here for you. We want to really form a relationship between parents and the church that when things come up in these kids' lives, which they will, the parent has a relationship with the parish, with the small group leader, that they look to the church for help, not just about questions of faith, but questions of life, about struggles they encounter. And we can only have that when we begin to really partner with parents. We want to make sure that there's a conversation going around between parents and students and the small group leader. We also want to make sure that our third principle that we move on to is it's about conversation within the small group, that it's critical that small group leaders cause dialogue within the small group.
Right. So we haven't even gotten to the small group yet. We're talking about showing up as the first principle and then partnering with parents. These are all things to do, not even necessarily while the group is happening, but then now you're ready, right? You're meeting with students, you're meeting with young people in a small group setting. And this might seem pretty obvious, but this is the place where we need to have conversations with young people and need to be the folks that cause it. Over and over again, especially with new people who are in this role of forming young people, we hear the question of how do I get them to talk? What does it take to get a young person to be willing to open up and share about what's really going on in their life? And there are a lot of different things that you can do with that. Namely, we've got a few right here. One is to set a good tone by sharing your expectations right off the bat of what's going to go on in that small group. Another is that your students are going to know that you will speak the truth in love, meaning that you're going to share the truth of the church and not necessarily your opinions or thoughts, but that we're going to share church wisdom and we're going to be willing to encounter tough questions. But what we really want to talk today about is asking those great questions. Now, sometimes our small group leaders are a little intimidated because they think I'm going to walk into this small group and I'm going to turn into some kind of lecturer or some kind of expert in this particular field. And that's not what we're asking. We're not asking you to be the great teacher in this time. It's not necessarily even your time to shine. Because in a small group, you're not talking about a lecture or a presentation or reading questions that are on a piece of paper in front of you. We're talking about dialogue, and not dialogue with you, but dialogue among them. You are the catalyst who makes the dialogue happen. And so when we think about what the best small groups are like, we imagine those times where one student is bringing up something and another student is asking a question about that, and another student is maybe pointing out another thought, and they're talking amongst one another, maybe even having a debate. A debate can be a terrific small group. And your job is to nudge or nurture that conversation in the right direction. And Jesus gave us a great example of this. He asked the apostles, who do people say that I am? And who do you say that I am? He doesn't explicitly tell them that right away. He asks those questions first, and he lets them sort it out, because that's a better way of learning. That when you come to those conclusions on your own, you're going to remember that much better. So last weekend, we had ministry, and we had 2 brand new small group leaders. And they asked this question of, what am I supposed to do to implement curriculum? How am I supposed to get the truth of the church to these young people? And, I answered that in a couple different ways, because it was a really good question. And one of those was, yeah, our program does something for that. And all the programs, I think, speak to the truth of the church. And that's important, that those topics are there to speak on, that you can share. But when you think about what's really going to outlast this small group or make it in their minds beyond some kind of lecture, looks a little bit more like inspiration, looks a little more like you can make this relevant to the lives of these young people, or looks like sparking something that would cause them to seek further information. If we can just pique their curiosity a little bit, then they would do the necessary work to continue to learn and grow well beyond our 90 minutes we get with them once a week or so. This is one of my favorite quotes that I think illustrates this. If you want to build a ship, don't drum to the women and men to gather wood and divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. This is the same with our small groups, that if we would just show a hint of the remarkable, marvelous love of Christ, if we could give them a glimpse of that, then that would do much more than any lecture or lesson that we could otherwise give. If we would just point them in that direction, then Christ would run to them, and they would also approach Christ. Now, saying all this is good, but in order for us to share this remarkable love of Christ, you must have it first yourself as a small group leader.
Tiny detail.
We put this as the 4th principle, so it's like number 4 in your programs, but it's definitely number 1 in your hearts, and we want to share about being a follower.
Yeah, this is one that when we were talking about these different principles, we didn't know where to put it. Where you can put these all in different order. But we liked it here, but we always want to make sure that we stress that this is not number 4 because it's the 4th important. Definitely not. It's almost the number 1 thing that you need, and it's be a follower. And I think be a follower just in itself is kind of a little bit counterintuitive. We live in America, and everything's about being a leader and being strong and being an innovator and leading the field and just lead. But in this one, we're saying be a follower. There's a talk, a TED talk, really short. I think it's like maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes long, really short TED talk by Derek Sivers, Sivers. And it's called How to Start a Movement. And I would encourage you after this to go and check it out if you haven't before. And he talks about how to really start a movement, how to get people in a certain direction. And the conclusion he comes to, it's not the leader that starts a movement, but it's the first follower. It's a first adopter. Because when a leader is starting anything, a leader is going to look crazy and weird and different. But when that first follower follows that leader, no longer is that leader different and weird and alone, but now it's part of it starts to become normalized. And now the next follower, it's a little bit easier for that follower to join. And in the same principle, if we are followers of Christ, that can make it easier as students know us and we're following Jesus, it makes Jesus a little bit more easy to follow. Now, Jesus is God and he can transcend those things, but we really embrace this principle of being a follower. So the first person you need to follow is Christ. Your pursuit of holiness is paramount. If holiness is not in your pursuit for a small group leader, then this may not be the thing for you to do this year. You can't sacrifice your holiness to be a small group leader, or to be involved in a ministry, to be a catechist, to be an RCIA team member. Your holiness needs to come first. And if that is not something you're pursuing, then we want to be in relationship with you. We want to help you, but this is probably not the place that you need. You don't need to be accompanying others right now. Perhaps you need to make sure that you can have that in line. We're saying pursuing holiness, right? We're not saying you've attained ultimate holiness, but the pursuing of it needs to be there. The other thing is we want to make sure that you don't follow alone, that you should not be out there. The community is a key part in following Christ, and the community that you are ministering to, especially in youth ministry, is not the community that should support you. You should not be in youth. Our small group leaders should not be in youth ministry because they need friends, or they need support. They need someone to support them in their faith life, and there's going to be these high schoolers. Now that community could be other small group leaders, other those who are pursuing to help the ministry. But it's important that they find community and support, and they don't fall alone. And we go into that in the other places we'll talk about, where you can find more information about these different principles. But the one we want to dive deeper into today real quickly is to understand boundaries. That we need to make sure that you're practicing safe conduct and making space for yourself. Now, this is Jake. Luckily, he gave me this one because this is the most fun one to talk about. Boundaries. It's why people sign up for youth ministry. It's why everyone's involved in ministering to middle schoolers and high schoolers, because they want to talk about boundaries. But maybe it's not fun. Maybe it's not the reason to sign up, but it is important. Number one, you have a responsibility to yourself and to your family, that your primary vocation is not to be a minister or a volunteer, we tell them, in youth ministry. Your primary vocation is called to holiness. Perhaps if you're a husband or a wife or a mother or a father, it's to your family. And that should never, this ministry that we're doing should never come in place of that. That is your ultimate calling, your first and primary vocation. And probably what makes you a small group leader, a great small group leader, is that you have those priorities in order. And so to come into this ministry and then start sacrificing family time and sacrificing, putting your marriage on the back burner, that's not, that you're putting on the back burner one of the big reasons why you're such a great small group leader. And small groups can be different. It can be shiny new toys. They can be in new relationships and people who think you're the best because they don't know all the warts that you have. Not that you're not the best, but they don't know all the warts you have. And so we really encourage them not to kind of be overtaken by that shiny new toy of these new relationships, and make sure you stay responsible and faithful to those old relationships, the family, the primary relationships. And then you have a responsibility to student protocol. Every diocese and parish has a set of guidelines to keep you safe and keep our adults out of situations that can become inappropriate. And it's important that we're familiar with those. The small group leader, they're not just there to cause trouble and havoc. Be familiar with those and follow those. Be okay with being a follower of these protocols, saying no to certain situations because they go outside this. There's plenty of room. Sometimes as ministers, we look at everything that prevented that we can do, or volunteers look at everything they can't do, but we want to encourage people all the things that they can do in those protocols, and ask questions about those protocols. Is it okay if I do this? Is it okay if I do that? Instead of just doing and then asking forgiveness later. We really be a follower of those is what we ask our small group leaders. And ministry can become messy, and these protocols are in place to help us stay safe in the messiness of ministry. It's not going to make the ministry safe and sterile and not messy, but it's going to make it able to do ministry. And finally, when you being a follower and understanding boundaries, is that you have a responsibility as a small group leader to understanding a larger youth ministry vision. This is not your ministry. This is not the youth minister's ministry. This is the ministry of Christ and ministry of this parish. And that quote, that Bible passage from 1 Corinthians, first chapter, verse 10 through 12, where it goes on, and like different people in Corinth, the church in Corinth, are saying that they're different followers of they belong to Paul or Apollos or Typhus, but rather we're all belong to Christ. we are one in the church. And it's important that we are following that one singular vision of youth ministry, and that what we're doing is not going against a youth minister or the leader of the parish, but rather we're in support of that. It doesn't mean you can't disagree, but just means you need to know when and how to have those conversations. And those conversations and that youth ministry vision is important that we're a part of it, because that ministry means that having that vision means that the ministry that we're doing in that small group, it's a part of something bigger. And that kind of leads us to our last principle, that we want to make sure that we're not trying to solve everything in one small group meeting or one year of ministry, but we try and play the long game, the longer picture. And the small group leader and their role has a place in that longer vision. It's important to keep that in perspective.
Amen. When we talk about principle number 5, I think about when I first went to college, just a few years ago, and my parents dropped some great parental wisdom on me before we left, and they talked about staying in touch with them after I was away at school. And they said it's better to make short but frequent phone calls with us than it is to just wait for big messy things to happen and to call us at that point. Be in consistent communication with us over the long haul, and that will be better for everyone. And I didn't quite understand just how right that was for them, and it really helped our relationship and would be advice I'm sure I will pass along to my kids someday. But I think it's relevant to us in ministry also. Like, we've all been there, right? We are planning for whatever's coming up, whatever activities and events and ministries that we have, and we get that tunnel vision of what is happening this week, and that takes all of my attention. But it's important for us to step back a little bit and look at the big picture. What role are we and aren't we playing in a young person's life as a small group leader? And so when our small group leaders work with young people, they are not going to be the first interaction with Christ in the church. Most likely there's going to be a friend who's brought them in, or a family that's raised them, or some other connection, and nor will they be the last. And so our ministry to youth is not the alpha and omega. There's something before and usually something after. So we have this window of time for usually several years that are very influential, but aren't the end all be all for what's going on. And so I guess to shorten this, I'm saying that youth ministry doesn't last forever, and we should plan for that. We should plan accordingly. And so we should connect our young people to the things beyond just youth ministry if we want them to be disciples for the long haul. And so that's what today I really want to talk about, this alpha and omega. And that when we're saying connecting people to something, we're talking about advocating for long-term small groups and remembering our place in this discipleship journey of our young people. We always, when we tell our small group leaders what our whole vision of this thing is, of this ministry, I always share this idea that someday I would be sitting in my office just like this, and somebody walks up to the door and they knock on the door and they say, "Hey, I'm new to the parish. I just moved to the area. I've been involved in my faith since I was a young person. I'm very well formed. I'm a person of prayer, and I'm ready to get started, ready to get involved." And even though that's like my dream that somebody might walk in and do that today here, what my real hope is that all of our students are going to do that someday at their future community. The way we say it is that we're growing valuable members of future Catholic communities. And to do that, we're trying to connect them to things besides just this little community and youth ministry. We're connecting them to their families. We're connecting them to the sacraments. We're connecting them especially to the Eucharist, to prayer, to parish life. And those are things that can persist down the road for them. And if these are the things we're thinking of, if we're thinking the long game of, well, we're going to work with these students for a while, and at some point we're going to send them off, then suddenly our small groups, they start to look a little different in the way that we plan for them. Because our small groups work best when not every one of those interactions have to be this big life-changing moment for a young person. If we go back to the wisdom my parents gave me, if we commit to meeting consistently over the course of time and having those frequent but maybe shorter talks then that's the real life changer. That's the authentic relationships. They take time to get there. Love is patient. And so we advocate for small groups that largely stay together once they've been formed. That's not just the same small group like this week and next week, or even for the whole semester, or even for the whole year for that matter. The ideal in this would be that you would join a small group as a 6th grade student, and you would stay with the same small group and small group leaders for 3 years while you're in middle school. Or maybe you join as a freshman in 9th grade and you stay for 4 years in high school. Now, I know when I first heard that was an intimidating prospect to change a lot of logistics and get people on board for that. But it also changes who's in that small group, that suddenly maybe you do want to start grouping students who are friends in the same group so that they might stick together for the long haul, or maybe find similar interests or even residential areas where their students live and group them according to those things. And even if your program that you have doesn't necessarily call for those things specifically, we're talking about people, and there are ways that you can set up those small groups to stay together. And these are our 5 principles, and this is the ideal of what we want our small group leaders to be doing while they're in small groups. And don't know what you think about those, but we think they're really great. But it does lead to this pretty consequential question after that. How do we form leaders who do that? Like maybe you're saying, that sounds good. I wish my small group leaders could be these sorts of people who are accompanying youth in such depth. But how do we get to that? How do we accompany those who accompany? And we have a familiar set of ideas for what that might look like as well.
Yeah, so I think oftentimes this question is not the question that is, there's a Facebook group out there for Catholic Youth Ministry leaders, and this question doesn't come up a lot. How do we form the leaders? It's always about like what program, what icebreaker can we do? But we believe that this is the key. How do we form leaders who can live out these principles of accompany young people? And oftentimes, ministry years, it starts out with a big meeting in August where we lay out the plan, we give out the curriculum, we say these are the days we're going to meet, this is what we need from you, and then maybe we do a Christmas party or an Advent party. Maybe we do another, if we're really on it, we do another training in January, and then we do a celebration at the end of the year saying, hey, we did it, whew, we survived. Because when we're trying to form leaders, we're trying to balance this tension between forming leaders and monopolizing all their time. Just getting them all these meetings. When I used to do it, we used to try and do a formation event for our leaders every once a month, but then it would be in the evening and then they couldn't make it because of their family commitments, et cetera, or their work commitments. So how do we balance this? And we think that the principles we just laid out do that. That when we accompany these small group leaders, that we can begin to model to them and show them and help form them to accompany young people. So for example, number 1, our first one, showing up in the lives of young people. The same way, how are we caring for those who care for young people? How are you showing up in their lives? I think of a funny analogy of, you may remember some years ago, Peyton Manning did I think it was American Express. I can't remember what credit card it was, but maybe it was some credit card where he was out cheering at everyone's like jobs. Like he was at the butcher and they were cutting meat. He's like, cut that meat. And I don't think that we necessarily are asking youth ministers to go into, your leaders' jobs and start cheering them on and showing up like you'd show up at a youth event. But maybe, no. But how are you meeting with them outside of small group of their ministry? Are you only checking in with them on those small group nights? How are you showing? Do you send them an email? Hey, I'd love to just catch up. I'd love to get some lunch. I'll take out the lunch. Or I'd love to meet you for coffee. Or when can I sneak a meeting in with you to check in to see how you're doing? The struggles you're having in ministry, but then just how you're doing in general. We need to be showing up in the lives of those who we're asking to be volunteers in our ministry. And I think we're not doing that enough. And if we don't do that for them, by doing it for them, we're showing how much of a priority it is, how important it is. So it gives more weight to when we ask them to do that for their youth. It gives more weight because we're doing that for them. The next thing, partner with families. What do you know about your small group leaders' families? Do they have youth in the ministry? Do they have older youth in college? Are they empty nesters? Do they have grandchildren? How do you know what do you know about the families of the other leaders? When you have a formation event, is there a way that you make it family friendly? So that's not the leader just always leaving their family to come to what you're doing. Is there some time, and I know with COVID, that's hard to have large gatherings, but when you're able to do that, or whenever you're planning, are you thinking a way of like, how can I incorporate their families in this? Because they come from families and they're part of families. We don't want to only have them apart, away from their families all the time. And do you factor families in how you're leading, you're forming your leaders? We think that that's a really important thing to do when you're forming them, that we don't always think of on the first half. So the principles 3 and 4 kind of still follow a similar suit.
Yeah, and when we talk about causing dialogue in small groups, I know I can be guilty of this. I'll do all the different things to try to give instructions to our small group leaders. Here is what you need to talk about in this order, and here's different questions and activities you can do. But maybe sometimes I fail to miss the really key point of, did we have a dialogue with this beforehand? Did we discuss this tough topic? Did I give you resources so that you could learn about this before walking in? Am I asking you to do something that I haven't modeled myself? And that causing dialogue with our group is actually our way of speaking the truth in love, of making sure that our leaders are well-formed and can pass along the faith. I think a lot of times we're so wrapped up in the details of getting them where they need to go that we can fail to inspire them and remind them of the reason that they're there in the first place. We also need to be a follower for our leaders. I talked about earlier that somebody needs to, when they're a small group leader, they need to show up being a person of prayer in the first place. They need to be somebody who, this particular ministry event is not the entirety of their faith formation. In fact, they should have lots of other interesting ways of forming their own personal spirituality, working on their own discipleship. And the reason that they're here is because they do all those things. But I wonder, do we always know what those different spiritual interests are of our small group leaders? If something came across your desk and you had a chance to share that with them, would you know enough about what they're interested in to suggest really interesting opportunities for them to help them be a follower outside of just that small group youth ministry that you're a part of? And similarly, we as leaders of these ministries, if you're supervising or organizing these small group leaders, we need to be very cautious that we are followers as well. That when they think of our ministry, they think first of Christ and of the parish, and they don't think of that particular ministry leader. This should all be based not on us, but on us as followers. And that's the key thing for us to remember. And there's a real danger to that when you're the person who's the key point on so many different things. And how are you pointing all those others to Christ? Again, these are things that are tough to do. These sound a little bit less like a checklist to do for every person and more like a true relationship. And as we said, relationships take time. And so principle number 5 fits just as well here.
Yeah. We really want to make sure that when we're forming our small group leaders, our catechists, our RCI team members, that we're playing the long game. That we need to remember that volunteers and forming disciples and leaders, those who are accompanying other people, takes time. It's not going to be one day where you give out the worksheets in the calendar and you give them a couple principles and it's done. But it's going to take years to form that, and that's okay. That we're walking alongside of them as they're forming themselves to be someone who accompanies other people. But also, as we're doing that, as we're playing the long game, there may be a year where you check in with a volunteer and they say, "Hey, I can't do it this year," and it's not like, "Well, you're dead to me. See you later." It's like, "Okay, well, I'm going to circle back with you. Is there anything we can pray for? Is there anything you need from us right now?" Okay, no, yes, and then in a year's time, you circle back. Hey, how are things going? Maybe check in before that just to see how they're doing if they shared something that you needed to follow up on. But that we're not so concerned with the immediate, and I think so often we are. When I look through bulletins in the early fall or late summer, early fall, July, August. It's we need volunteers, we need catechists, and so often we treat them like disposable goods. We treat our volunteers like, hey, we need you for a year, we need you to fill in this classroom, we need you to fill in this small group, we need you at this part on this team. But then if you don't come back, okay, well, we care about you, but we're gonna need to find someone else to follow in. And as Jake said, this is more about relationships, right? And amassing those relationships and forming those relationships to look towards the long game. So I know we did not give you the exact program to form small group leaders. Do this many meetings, talk about this thing at the meeting, and do this and this and this, because we can't. Because your parish, your institution, where you work, it's going to be different. Where you're a leader is going to be different than what we do. But we think you need to take these principles and apply it to your own community. Because it's going to look different, and you, the leader, the God has chosen, has called to lead that community, you're going to know the best way to do that. And we want to be a part of that conversation, especially if it's around youth ministry. We have a podcast, as Aaron said earlier, it's called Pizza and Side Hugs. Check it out. You can find it on Apple. There are 2 different Pizza and Side Hugs. Both of them are ours. And actually, in one of them, you'll see the episodes. I think they're in the 20s. We have an episode on each of these principles. Now, they're for a youth ministry slant, but we think the principles can apply to all ages when we're talking about accompanying people. So we appreciate you giving us the time to talk about these principles. We'd love if you have any questions or any thoughts. We love talking about this stuff. So thanks so much, and thanks, Aaron, for your giving us this opportunity to have the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So just real quick, the podcast is specifically for youth youth leaders?
Yeah, I would say
Okay.
it's a youth ministry leadership podcast. I mean, what we try and do is we start to have the conversation about Catholic youth ministry. So I think principles, I think it'd be great for a pastor or a priest or anyone involved in youth ministry as well. I'm a person who likes to hear ideas and big ideas and can apply that. Like I just don't listen to youth ministry podcasts. I'll listen to other podcasts and take what they think and apply it to my stuff. So if you're a person like that, I think we give a lot of creative ministry stuff that you can apply to any sphere. But we're not going to have a session on RCIA for adults. Like that's
Sure.
not going to be our topic.
Okay, great. So it's called Pizza and Side Hugs.
Yes, because that's everything. That's the thing you have at all youth ministry meetings. You got to have pizza, and then you got to have the side hug.
Side hug, right?
That's
That's great. That's great. Well, I encourage anybody on here who would like to send in a question to please do so at this time. Already got some coming in here. Mary said early on, love that quote that you, or that principle that you stated, how the first follower starts a movement, and how important that is, just like the first followers of Christ, right, started the church.
And I think that shows the importance of a small group leader, right? That by following Christ, right, you're opening. If you're forming a relationship with a youth, and you're following Christ, you're being a doorway to Christ, right? You're making that connection but if you're not following Christ, then they're not going to see that. And you're doing a great job making that relationship. You need to make sure the other part is connected as well.
Absolutely. So my first question you both stole in the second part of your presentation, because I was thinking, right, so what do you do, right, to form these leaders, to form these volunteers? Could you give us a couple of like real specific examples? Jake, either what you do now in your parish, or Paul, what you've done in the past, or that youth ministry leaders do to really connect and form with their leader volunteers?
Yeah, I could jump in with that. And I mean, again, I think getting kind of the heart of this thing of the people, not programs, is that I cater that to our individuals. So I'm trying to, all year, I am looking for things that are going to fit our particular folks that are in that small group leader role. And we've got a few things of, I think when you're a brand new small group leader, that's a really tough time. And so I'm checking in by text or phone call every week for the first couple months with those guys to make sure they feel comfortable. I'm giving them a walkthrough the first time, I'm making sure experienced people are sitting in with them. Those are all ways of forming them with that. One of my favorite things to do with our veteran leaders, and we've got people who have been doing ministry for 25 years, is like, I have that challenge every summer, is what am I going to do to keep that guy interested this year? What am I going to do to make sure this is still a challenge and he's developing and growing, even though he's been doing this forever? And that's really fun. Sometimes that's giving them some unique leadership roles of being a mentor to the mentors, I think is sometimes things that we can set up. Also, it's finding the different opportunities that, I don't necessarily have time to create all new opportunities, but there's a lot of good stuff out there. I know we've joined in with other activities. One of the best things, I guess, is a little bit of promotion too, but one of the best things we've done for our groups is we've taken part in this event that Paul's actually helped plan called a campference, and it's at the end of the year, and it's a part camp, part conference, part retreat, and it's really accessible for our youth ministry leaders, and it's something that I think other people could put together. But essentially, it's an event to get small group leaders from different parishes all together to work on their own faith, but then to interact with one another. I think if they start getting in conversations with one another, it starts the wheels turning in their brain of, oh, I'm starting to understand and imagine more and more what this role could be.
Yeah, I always valued, I'm probably a meeting guy, and that sounds bad. Like, I don't like having meetings with lots of people, but I like, if I'm not meeting with others and having conversations and listening to what they're going on, my ministry, it just feels stagnant. I feel like I get stuck. So what I would do when I was at a parish is I would just try and set up as many meetings as I could. And I think that that's difficult sometimes, right? Especially when you're talking to your supervisor and you're like, well, I went out for coffee 7 times this week. And they're like, well, why? What fruit did you have from that? And it's like, well, I developed a great relationship and I know where they are with their in their faith. And those take, the fruit comes after years of accompaniment. And so that would be the practical things, is like, how many times are you meeting with, and it's, whether it's youth ministry or I think especially like RCIA or if you're a DRE, how many times are you taking your catechist out for coffee? And maybe it's one-on-one, maybe it's 2-on-1, just to hear how they're doing. So often we get into like a very like, here's your job, here's your rules, do this task, and then we'll be all good. And I think you got to get outside of that. You've got to be forming those relationships, because that's the crucial part of all of this. So it's a really easy one, but I think it's really important.
Right. You get so caught up in the administrative part of the job and miss touch with the people.
Yeah. And I think that's, how do you support that at your parish, right? If you're a pastor listening to this, like, how are you supporting your ministers forming relationships with others? And I think for some people listening on this call, and if you've gotten this far, you might not have a lot of volunteers. And I think that in itself also can be tricky. Like, you need to be started looking at these principles to building a team. And that's another podcast. It's another talk, how to recruit. But like, you need to recruit volunteers. You need to recruit a ministry team, and you can't just do it all by yourself. So, yeah.
And putting an announcement in the bulletin isn't always the most effective way to recruit volunteers.
Yeah, you can take always. It isn't the most effective.
Yeah.
I have never met, and maybe someone can put in the questions here that they're the exception to the rule, but on all my conversations, I've never met someone. Hey, I put this advertisement in the bulletin, and I got 50 volunteers this week. Look at that. It just took one announcement in the bulletin. No, it doesn't usually happen that way.
Right.
Because Christ didn't do that way, right? Christ approached and he called people by name. And he said, come follow me. In the same way, we're called to do that with our volunteers.
Here's a question from Roland. How do we get the small group leaders to not just be a friend, but a mentor? Any pointers to help them understand this boundary, especially when the small group leaders are young?
Yeah, good question, Roland. And I think, again, that's, it kind of depends to what extent you're talking about. If that's a particular situation, I think it's a conversation with someone that you've started to build a relationship with. Here's a young-ish person who's in that role, and you start to notice some things that might be a little, like you need to grow into more of the adult role, then that's something to have a conversation about. I think that's part of setting expectations at the start of the year with your team of this is what I'm actually asking you to do. Sometimes that takes a lot to explain. I mean, we basically just gave a whole session on explaining what you're supposed to do. And so having some of those things written down for your folks I mean, we have a whole job description of what it means to be a volunteer for the various roles, and that's something that's helpful. And I think, I mean, my usual line with some of that with folks is that, you know, these students, there are plenty of opportunities for them to have friends in their life. There are not a lot of great opportunities for them to have mentors. And making sure that we're in that role of the adult mentor is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, I think, you know, that last line Jake said is perfect. And like putting that out there to individuals, especially if they're young adults, that's going to be a struggle, because not only do the young person see themselves in the high schoolers, but the high schoolers looking at the young adult like, you're not that much older. I can totally relate to you. But posing what Jake just said and then causing that dialogue. Well, what do you think when you say that? You know, what are the possible problems that can come from if you're just their friend and you don't have those boundaries? What are what things could happen? Why would that not be the best? And see what they say. And if they say no, I'm going to be their friend, I'm like, great. You don't need our youth ministry to be their friend. You don't. Go be their friend. That is not going to, in our role, what you're serving here is we're asking you to be their mentor. So I think like having that difficult but good conversation, to me, it's probably going to be one of those things where you got to expect a conversation there, rather than just being like, no friendships, or here's the line, don't cross it. So that's a great question. Great problem to have too, having young people as small group leaders. Like I know some parishes that would love if a young adult would, they desperately need young adults. So that's great, Roland, that you have young adults wanting to be mentors in your program.
And yeah, maybe one other brief thing on that is sometimes I think we got to, you know, take a look at the mirror in those situations too, is we have to be really cognizant to treat that person as an adult and to give them, speak to them in those roles and responsibility. A lot of times maybe that's somebody that was in our ministry and they're coming back to help and they're that young age, but are we including them in all the adult, you know, gatherings and conversations that we're having? And so to make sure that we treat them the way that we hope they're acting.
Mm-hmm. So I know that our time is running out here, and I imagine that this looks different in different places, but can you give us maybe like a little brief explanation of what you do in your, not what you say to your leaders, but like how many do you meet regular time before the youth ministry meetings will begin with your leaders as a group?
Yeah,
Jake,
and there's, I mean, so what we do is I guess we try to mix up different opportunities for them. But I think it's really important for us to process what's happened in youth ministry. And so we'll set up times to meet for 20 minutes after a particular night. I know some parishes do that every week. We try to do that once a month at our parish. And that, again, there's no program. It's just dependent on what your people look like. There are, I think, having times for those coffee meetings are very regular, and I think doing that, you know, at least quarterly with each person for me is kind of on my loose agenda as the person who organizes the small group leaders. And then making sure to, especially when we're having a big topic or something you don't discuss all the time, to making sure we're sharing resources and having conversations before you ever go into that meeting. Like I would hate for a small group leader to have to go into a meeting to talk about a really thorny issue. We have a night coming up on how the church and the state, how church and politics are supposed to engage. And that's a tough topic to talk about, but we're going to, we as the church need to discuss it. But that's going to be tough for the small group leaders. And so we're having a whole conversation beforehand so that they can get their questions out and experience some of the, maybe the obstacles that might come to that ahead of time. We're going to cause dialogue with them so that they're prepared to cause dialogue in their groups.
Yeah, so I think that you need to take time as a leader to figure that out. and make it a priority. What often happens is we get so bogged down in administration that then the relationship part and forming your small group leaders is like a bonus that never really comes to fruition. That we'd love to meet with them, but we don't have time. Those need to be the forming relationships with your small group leaders and your catechists. Those need to be the first big rocks in your priorities, and everything else falls underneath it. So whether that's coffee chats, whether that's resources, whether that's meeting before, meeting after, because that's going to be different. You might have a group that meeting before and after your session works perfectly for them, but you may need you may have a group that everyone goes to the 9 a.m. mass, and having a half an hour meeting after 9 a.m. mass, but then meeting Sunday night as well is best. It's going to depend on your situation, but I think the important thing for me is that you're sitting down and you have a plan of attack of how you're going to form them and how you're going to meet with them, and not just letting it happen to chance. Because if it happened to chance, there's plenty of, let's be honest, we're working in the church, there's plenty of stuff for us to do and stuff to come up. So
And one other hard truth with all of that is that if we're not planned in advance as the leader, if we are finalizing the schedule of what's going on the night before, very little chance that we're actually taking the time to form small group leaders as they need to in that way. And so I think that's the challenge on us, is not just for the sake of the young people, but for the sake of the volunteers. They may be on totally different preparation type schedules than we are, and we want to give them time to be well formed.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. You've given us real concrete ideas and principles to put into practice for the good of the church, for the good of our young people. Thank you for what you are doing, and for all of you that have joined us today. Thank you for your gifts to the church and for sharing this time with us with all these great questions. And if you have people that you want to share this webinar with, you can certainly share the recording that I will send to you tomorrow. It's on our website, it's on YouTube, as well as Vimeo. And we always like to give you a little treat here for spending this time with you, a little discount, 25% off your order at avemariapress.com using webinar 0922 for today's date.
nice.
So thank you again. You guys can use that promo code too. All right.
Christmas presents from Ave.
There you go. And I invite you to join us next Tuesday. Pam Patnode is the Dean of Women and Humanities Instructor at Chesterton Academy of the Twin Cities. She did her dissertation on how Catholic schools are able to better educate or meet the needs of Hispanic and Latino ELL students. And she's going to share some of those reasons and some of those practices that we too can put into place. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jake and Paul. Have an excellent day. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.